everybody. Welcome to VCF, Pretty cool we're doing this, My name is Olivares, and I run a 3D printer repair shop out in Covina with my brother. So if y'all need a 3D printer, just a little plug, look us up, or if you have a 3D printer and you need some help with it, definitely look us up. I'm going to do my best to stay on script. I'm usually better off script, but I don't want to miss anything. So anyway, if you need anything, definitely look us up. We'll be more than happy to help you out. My details will also be there at the end, but I'm not hard to find if you just search for 3D printer repair on the internet. So anyway, today I am going to detail the steps that exposed a hidden control scheme in a flagship title for an abandoned console. Specifically, I'm talking about Tempest 3000 on the Nuon, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about that. I originally got interested in the Nuon platform because I'm kind of a fan of Jeff Minter's work. Jeff Minter has been making software as LlamaSoft since the 80s. Besides influential light synth software and music visualizers, LlamaSoft titles exhibit a trademark style of rewardingly addictive gameplay, llamas and ruminants, bright colors, and bizarre sound effects. One example is a highly playable, surrealist clone of the Atari 2600 game Empire Strikes Back, titled Attack of the Mutant Camels, where the AT-ATs are replaced by giant mutant camels. Jeff did plenty of contract work for Atari, and LlamaSoft is still very active today. So first, a little history of Tempest, Jeff Minter, and the Nuon. The Tempest would be a play by William Shakespeare, 1611. The Tempest is a stand-up arcade by Dave Thurer, but 1981 arcade stand-up game. The Jaguar is a 1993 not-so-successful game console, fifth generation, couldn't tell you. But Tempest 2000 was a sequel to Tempest and was developed by Jeff Minter as a flagship title for the Jaguar. Late in its life, the Jaguar CD was released, which included a virtual light machine, which was coded by Jeff Minter, and that was the first time I think some of his software was included as firmware in some hardware. Atari went out of business a year later, and their consoles got liquidated. I think the San Diego Computer Museum guy out here has one of the Atari, their molds were sold and they were resold to a dental company, so there's some dental equipment that uses a Jaguar shell, which is kind of fun. Some of that's out there. Following this, the people that worked at Atari started VM Labs, which was kind of, they're attempting to kind of enter that generation of consoles, and what they developed was essentially a turnkey DVD platform, which they were trying to sell to OEMs to kind of get into the living room. This is kind of an early attempt at companies that weren't already game publishers trying to get into the living room. The Nuon also includes a Jeff Minter developed virtual light machine built into the firmware. So there's a pattern here. Tempest 3000, continuing on this pattern, Tempest 3000 in the year 2000, was released as a Nuon flagship title and further sequel to Tempest 2000 by Jeff Minter. Nuon didn't work, assets went out of business, similar pattern there. The assets of VM Labs got sold to Genesis Microchip and then later to ST Micro. In 2005, the Xbox 360 is released. We're kind of moving past my timeline, but just to kind of keep the pattern going. Xbox 360 includes an interactive music visualizer coded by Jeff Minter called Neon. This is actually something a lot of people don't know. If you put a CD in your Xbox 360 and it shows these cool things, you can plug in 4 controllers and the analog sticks will actually control this, which is harkening back to Jeff Minter's early light synths because there was no music reactive. You just used the joystick while you kind of enjoyed your music. And Jeff Minter released a bizarro kind of Tempest-like game, Space Giraffe, on Xbox Live Arcade, which definitely plays like Tempest, like an obfuscated Tempest on acid, but very much in Jeff Minter style. And then in 2014, Jeff Minter made a game that was maybe a little bit too much like Tempest, and Atari got mad. This was at the period where Atari wasn't really Atari, was Atari just called Atari, and the guys that Jeff Minter used to work for, they were like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "Who are you?" And anyway, Jeff Minter's feelings got hurt about this. It's achingly sad because I loved Atari. Getting to work there and creating one of their last great games was such a joy for me. So again, we're just kind of in the timeline, but following this, Jeff goes ahead, LlamaSoft kind of publishes Polybius, which is Not Tempest. It's Tempest-like, but racing. You're moving instead of shooting more. It's not Tempest on acid, but kind of like Tempest on acid. And it's on acid in VR, which is always good. So anyway, then you've got Tempest 4000. This was in the period where friendship regained with Atari, and they were cool again, and he was allowed to put his blessing on a game again, and that was Tempest 4000, which is basically TXK, just actually called Tempest this time. This one plays like Tempest because it is Tempest. And then today he's got AKR, which just now they just can't, this should say 2024 because now it's on PSVR 2. So you're going to get to be inside of another Jeff Minter game, which is going to be fun. And I don't understand British headlines. Like this is good, But anyway, that's good apparently. So yeah. Anyway, so. Just explaining Tempest for those that may not be familiar with some context. Tempest gameplay is very consistent through the sequels. The ship maneuvers on the outer rim of a tunnel, and enemies are kind of bursting forth from the center. It's supposed to kind of be like, the idea was Dave Thoreau, the original game designer, saw a movie where some baddies were kind of coming out of a hole, and that was kind of the idea that he was going for. Technical speak, Tempest gameplay, a ship maneuvers along the outer rim of tunnel stages, shooting at enemies that drift towards the player's ship along the inner walls of the playfield. The player returns fire, and a screen-clearing super zapper weapon is recharged at every stage. Gameplay-wise, Minter sequels add jumping, hovering, and fire upgrades with collected power-ups, as well as distinct bonus stages that effectively break up the action. Rather than a standard joystick, Tempest uses a spinner knob, and that's a weighted wheel that rotates continuously with no end stops. You can kind of think of a mouse wheel, like a heavy mouse wheel sideways. You start this thing spinning, it's got a weight underneath, so it kind of has some velocity, and dude will kind of go around with it. So, and the way that works is actually kind of interesting technically. There's a pair of optical sensors, and as the light passes, it uses a single wheel to see like when one passed and when the other didn't, and that creates what's called a gray code, which so basically the idea is it can kind of see the directions with a sort of rudimentary sort of circuit. So anyway, I did some thrifting back in 2015. I passed on the Defender cabinet, even though that would have been a win. I just didn't have the space. And instead scored the SD2300 Nuon player because I knew about the Virtual Light Machine. I really wanted one myself. Scored it, and this is not uncommon. These things are easy pretty much to find in thrift stores. That's really the best place to get them, even though the Nuon console is kind of easy to find on eBay, and they're not too expensive. And then actually at Maker Faire that same May, searching around and just keeping my eyes open, I was able to score a Samsung M501, and the reason I did that is because the Virtual Light Machine on that has a few more presets and it runs a little bit smoother. And basically, as goes with this kind of thing, if you get into the Nuon, maybe you enjoy VLM, you bring yourself a copy of Tempest because it doesn't care as long as the disk has the right files on there for authentication. And then I wanted to play a game. So you can play the games with the remote, but basically, you can buy a controller, but this is literally, I just grabbed this the other day, $200, 320, 220, these are out of box for this bad boy right here, which is just extortion as far as I'm concerned. It's not a good controller. But this is, the reason why controllers are exceptionally rare is for a couple of different reasons. As a DVD player, it didn't natively necessarily include a remote in the box with one or two exceptions. All the pack-in titles were fully playable with the remote. If you don't have a gamepad, you can use the infrared remote control. And then right there, the infrared controller is not recommended for a primary controller. But then, as I kind of show, I think here, the actual controller ports themselves are not even visible on the front of the console, so you might not even know that your DVD player plays games or take controllers. And then on top of it all, the thing wasn't successful in the marketplace, so even Tempest fans might not know about it. You didn't have Discord back then. And then, basically, in the aftermarket, all of the stock that had been sitting on company shelves just got crushed. And the main reason why that can't just be replaced in the aftermarket is because of this bad boy right here, which is proprietary silicon that's inside of the controller, which is the polyface chip. So several basic controllers did make it to market. Two Samsung controllers. You'll notice the Logitech controller and the HPI controller actually have analog sticks. A couple of games actually expected that, so you could have a controller that, it doesn't really work well. And Hot Products, this was cool. They actually did the OEM for the Samsung controller over there. But no other exotic configurations for controllers made it to market, although at the CES 2001, this is an 8-controller splitter breakout. This is a memory card, and then that's the output of another kind of controller test program that I've never seen. But inside of the system, there is support for a ton of different controller ports natively supported by the system BIOS, because that's kind of the way the thing works, including, you know, of course, a pachinko, or there's a pachinko controller, but then there's also a, you know, crane controller. Of course, you know, you need that. But at least they were forward-thinking. So Nuon controllers contain a polyface chip which communicates with the console to expose capability of a given device. The chip itself was designed to handle a considerable number of optional peripheral splitters for 8 pads, rumble pads, memory cards, steering wheels, serial ports, all kinds of gear that never materialized. Conceptually similar to, you know, the N64 control part. This doesn't have a name. This is just called the port in the controller. These are the this is the controller pack. That's the rumble pack, and then that's the transfer pack. I was confused because I was like, well, what do they call the slot in that thing? It's not just for VMUs. Anyway, yeah, it's just called like the controller slot. So you remember, you all remember that. So anyway, a little more background. As the DVD standard was being finalized in 1995 following the failure of the Jaguar and the liquidation of Atari, the now ex-Atari folks, I'm sorry, I might be going a little, am I speaking too fast, guys? I'm going to slow it down a little. Okay, I'm going to slow it down a little bit. A little more background, just as the DVD standard was being finalized in 1995, following the failure of the Jaguar and the liquidation of the Atari folks got the band back together and secured funding for a DVD chipset, I think realizing that they knew they weren't going to be competitive with Nintendo, with Sega, you know, it wasn't happening. But they did figure they could kind of be an also-ran, and their technology, you know, they saw DVD was coming, so they created a chipset for it. They shopped it around to OEMs as a turnkey platform, and you know, it finally hit the shelves, and they had several OEM partners. Toshiba and Samsung had DVD players that actually hit the shelves. RCA and Motorola had more kind of set-top box, although there was an RCA DVD player, I believe. And Motorola had like a whole thing that was like they were planning to have like Netflix type on-demand movies like in 2000 with internet delivery and, you know, all this cool stuff planned, internet delivered games and stuff, and they had Stream Master 5000, and it was part of like Motorola's digital DNA thing that they were trying at the time, and it just didn't happen. But actually some DVDs did actually hit the market with Nuon enhanced features. This is another aspect of it. So you were in this market of like an enhanced DVD player. So to give it special features, they actually included extra things that you could watch these. These are just normal DVDs. You can watch these on a regular DVD player. But when you put them in a Nuon player, it actually loads it like a game and then gives you the standard interface, but then also kind of wraps the DVD in some extra capabilities. Galaxy Quest was planned, never actually made it to market, but I believe the resources are floating around, so I hope somebody comes up with like a patch so we can kind of see what that might have looked like. But yeah, Buckaroo Banzai, Planet of the Apes, Dr. Dolittle, Galaxy Quest. These are all Fox, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But and there were several planned, but never actually announced. Rather than VM Labs sneaking a capable game console into the living rooms of people shopping for high-end DVD players, because this was the thing, when DVDs first hit the market, DVD players first hit the market, they were expensive. Like just the mass adoption hadn't happened and the cost of production hadn't gone down. I think I read that they were like $1,000, then maybe quickly down to $600 at the high end, and then very rapidly you had a budget market coming in, probably just cheap transports hitting the market, and just firmware is kind of like, oh yeah, you just make it do this and it plays DVDs. And so you were getting $100 DVD players. But 3 months after the Nuon hit the shelves, sorry, I guess I should have been on this slide. 3 months after the Nuon hit the shelves, the PlayStation 2 hit the market in October, and Sony. I think I kind of put it pretty well here. Sony beat VM Labs by turning the business on its head and including native DVD playback in the PlayStation 2. You could use the controller. It had the little add-on. Maybe you remember that. And this thing, people were lining up for this thing. When the Nuon came out, like even the people who were expecting it had to like mail order it, and that was like you had to send a check out and then get You couldn't just walk into Circuit City or Best Buy and get it, although anecdotally they did have shelf space in Best Buy for a long time apparently, that they apparently didn't pay for. Anyway, so yeah, and interestingly enough, because Sony made that decision, they had kind of a strategic advantage in that market being able to play DVDs. They had a $300 DVD player that you got basically a free PlayStation, or a PlayStation, with your $300 PlayStation, you got a free DVD player. So like the math just kind of didn't work out. And until Xbox came out kind of a year following, you know, and then by that point, you just had it was just kind of normal that your thing played DVDs. But you know, getting back to the Nuon hardware, oh, and you probably remember the little dongle for playing DVDs on the Xbox. I have a little few more slides about that maybe we'll get into because I just think it's an interesting kind of aside about the system and the kind of market that we were in that these companies were trying to get into the living room and just kind of didn't pan out. But the Nuon hardware was very advanced for the time, ambitious to say the least. You know, you got a quad core, these media processor engines in a system, and very long instruction word architecture, designed internally at VM Labs, and then I guess fabbed by Motorola, I believe. By the time they exited the market, there was very little software to take advantage of this. And the capabilities of the Aries main processor were really never fully exploited. And indeed, they actually had a final version right as they were kind of going out of business, taped out for being fabbed by TSMC, which was a reduced process and much more advanced, lower power. I think it was twice as fast. And you know, you can see that like the media processor engines are kind of more capable, and correctly written software could scale into that. Apparently Tempest 3000, according to Jeff, was the only one that was actually written to kind of scale into more advanced MPE. Anyway, back to my quest for a controller. I stumbled upon, back to my quest for a controller, an adapter, or some answers. I rapidly located the still active in 2024 Nuon Dome forums and a thread with some leads implying there was rotary control programmed into Tempest 3000. Jeff said so himself in an IRC interview providing intriguing details. The code to read the rotary is right inside the Nuon anyway. All I need to do is make the right cable. Already at Tempest 3000 and the BIOS. Mr. Jeff Minter has a Wingman Warrior and a spinner with a hacked cable that plays Tempest 3000. He used the aforementioned Wing Warrior for development. One of the VLMers actually hooked up a real Tempest spinner controller to his Nuon. And then a few more details. It wasn't just a cable. They did something, because people were asking me. He's like, they did something inside the beast, and the cable isn't detachable. They just told me, here, use this, and the operating system will recognize it as a quadrature spin. And lo, it did. Ominous. Here's John Romero counting his money while he tries to sell us a thing. It's kind of, I have 4 of these, and I didn't even remember. It actually does. I was like, how useless is this thing as an actual joystick? It doesn't have a throttle, but it actually does. That's what this little thing is here. Anyway, yeah, so the Wingman Warrior, apparently some logic engineer kind of tore that thing open. My guess is they had either had some PCB or they just jammed the guts of one of these inside of it and, handed it over. But anyway, through that thread, I met Nick Persing, who's a nice gentle fellow who is selling modded controllers for the Jaguar to work with Tempest 2000. In Tempest 2000, the rotary just connects directly to the D-pad inputs, and then you go into the menus in Tempest and kind of toggle to accept the rotary encoder. It certainly wasn't going to be this easy. Nick had kind of attacked this route and exhausted options there. Nick, I hit him up and said, hey, can I help? Nick accepted my offer, and by June 2015, had sent over what he had been able to dig up about the polyface chip and supplied me with several new controllers for diagnostics. He'd been hanging on to some for testing for a long time, and then he also sent me a Samsung first party, not this one, but a Samsung controller, another retail example that I could use for science. I then enlisted my buddy Adam to help with the reverse engineering, and basically from there we started digging into the leaked polyface spec documents. We got pinouts and reference schematic that didn't completely match the retail samples. These are the config mode resistors, but I mean, it's cool that they're here, but they're actually not accurate, so we were able to use this to kind of work off of this. These are the actual ones, but I'm not sure anybody cares. And then, we just kind of dug into this reference information, and we also had basically, this is the chassis side of the controller port. I just think it looks cool. And we located a controller dump program, which is a diagnostic program to display the properties and status of connected controllers. The diagnostic program is published in a collection of homebrew software and amps on a sampler disk, but for the life of me, we just could not get this thing to boot. We burned it, I swear, a dozen times, so slow, with and without padding, and it just wasn't happening. An SDK was released by VM Labs to basically, too late. Too early. An SDK was released by VM Labs to try and keep the system alive, including compilers and a toolchain to generate bootable CDRs specifically for the N501 player. Homebrew code was combined with a pre-signed bootloader that bypasses the system's authentication, and it shows a warning about possibly damaging your player. SDK also includes sample code and documentation on the Nuon system and BIOS. David Betts, an engineer at VM Labs, sorry, let me bounce twice here. Oh, there's the controller dump program. Kind of out of order here, sorry about that. David Betts actually wrote an article. Here's the warning that says like it's going to break your console. And then Dave Betts, who was an engineer for VM Labs, which was a former editor for Dr. Dobbs' journal, wrote this article to kind of generate some interest in the Nuon. Probably a little bit too late. So the deal is the optical pickup for the Toshiba player, okay, because there's a Toshiba and a Samsung that I own, can't read CDR discs. So it's not that it can't, there's this thing that like people say it can't boot Homebrew. Yes, it can't boot Homebrew, but it's not because it's not technically able to boot Homebrew. It's not technically able to because the pickup cannot physically read CDR discs. It can read like, CDs, authored CD, pressed CDs, but it cannot read burned CDR discs. Interesting, because I looked in the pickup, I'm like, why? But reasons. So we can't simply burn the bootloader, and we can't simply burn the CD contents to DVD, even though you'd think that would make sense. But the open platform loader that basically chain loads the thing and gives you the thing, and gives you the warning, it looks specifically for CD media, and so we can't just modify the loader because that would invalidate the signature that allows it to boot. So kind of a catch-22 there. The tools for authoring DVDs the tools for authoring the retail DVDs as opposed to the homebrew DVDs were leaked, and we actually did find some loose resources in there, which ended up being a functional Tempest 3000 prototype, which I had never seen before, and I can't find my disk, so sorry I don't have that to show, but apparently that exists, and I'll try to get that running at some point. But the controller dump code is included with the Open SDK, so we're able to grab that code, compile it, and burn a fresh copy, which booted after many, many tries. I mean, even though the Samsung can boot CDR, it's sometimes just doesn't wanna. Like you throw a pressed DVD in there, Tempest, whatever, it's no problem. Throw a DVD, Bedazzled or Dr. Doodle in there, it's happy to throw that on there. As soon as you throw a burned disc in there, it's like, it's got to think for a bit. Anyway, the N501 is very fickle when booting CDRs. And while the keys to sign the DVDs are available, they were locked away. So I mentioned the resources were around, but they were locked away in a GPG keyring. And the README with the passphrase apparently, well, I'm not sure if it's misleading or wrong, but it doesn't work. And the actual DVD keys materialized later. I only found that out actually really recently. He says he was lucky and guessed it, but Adam and over beers, we probably spent 3 weeks just doing various things to try and figure out what might have been wrong with the password. So, a likely story. But anyway, the Samsung first-party controller, getting back on track, the Samsung first-party controller PCB actually helpfully includes a full bill of materials. Let me get back on track here. Gary Crunk here. Thank you very much, Gary Crunk, for throwing that on the silk screen. I like your little controller pinout diagram that you did there. Good work. Silk screening with complete bill of materials, but comparing the spec document with the retail controller examples, and he just also designed the HPI Crunk. We call it the Crunk controller because even though I guess it's called Cobra, we call it the Crunk because it's Crunk's controller. But it's also got the bill of materials on there. The spec document and this didn't match, but by comparing them, we were able to actually get something that kind of resembled, it made sense. It made sense, okay? So we had something that we could use to proceed. Functionally, the Nuon, the polyface handshakes with the Nuon console and expose various features on the controller to the console managed by drivers in the Nuon system BIOS. Specifically, the same pins on the polyface can be used for different types of inputs. So once the BIOS has negotiated a mode with the chip, it configures the polyface with the correct inputs. The specific set of features exposed are determined by a pair of mode resistors. So there's 2 mode resistors, and there are main modes and config modes where the chip also reads a binary value from 8 digital input pins. So those mode resistors determine which mode the controller drops in, and then if it's in particular modes, then it will read a binary value from 8 GPIOs, which then determine additional features through some kind of bit mask or magic. There are assigned pins to connect the rotary per the spec documents. There's pins for the rotary, but it has to be in the mode where it will accept those. Electrically, we determined that there was a ground plane under the chip tied to the input pins, meaning we weren't actually, even if we got it in the mode, we weren't going to be able to send twiddles to it. So we decided to go ahead and start lifting pins. So stereo microscope, and we reworked the pins on flying leads, like you can kind of see here. A little bit better picture there. The mode resistors were on pads, and we were able to just kind of rework those separately on an improvised test stand. And then in July 2015, which was not long after we kind of started the project, after wiring the encoder circuit, we actually were able to find a mouse mode within the system, which according to my buddy, according to Adam, who we worked together on this, he claims that I said that there was a mouse pointer somewhere in there in the mouse mode, but I specifically don't remember that. Anyway, that may be true, that may not. It's complete rumor. But anyway, we got the encoder talking to the dump program. That was a watershed moment in the project we documented and shared with interesting parties. But getting some bits twiddled in a dump program is not playing Tempest 3000 with a spinner. It took me a year I was just busy with work, so nothing kind of moved on this until we kind of jumped over that hurdle. But then SoCal Retro Gaming Expo was announced. This is just more pins and stuff. SoCal Retro Gaming Expo got announced, and I decided to kind of either make or break this project by then. We pulled it out, went through all the main modes, got nothing, even though there was supposedly a mode that we should see something. So with that off, that meant we needed to brute force the other config modes, which meant kind of blazing through those 8 bits. With more kind of go on, and we needed to lift more pins to kind of access those bits, and we got nothing. It wasn't working. Nothing was happening. It just like, did we break it or whatever? So we worked backwards. We pull it back to a stock configuration, basically removing all of the additions, and what we found out after we kind of were diagnosed it, we actually pulled the chip off the board and found out there was not only a ground plane grounding the pins that we were dealing with on the quad input, but there was also a VCC trace going to the D7 high config bit. So basically, it had tainted all of our testing that we had done at that point on the config bits. So we took pictures, dropped the chip back on the board, made sure that the thing still worked, and then basically we were not going to continue bending pins because that was getting really tricky with 12 pins lifted and tacked on a magnet wire flying leads on a breadboard on an increasingly elaborate test stand. So we decided to get bold, and even though it's already been worked on several times, the right way to go, since we don't have a breakout board designed yet, we're just going to go ahead and pull the chip off and cut traces. So we cut the traces to isolate things, put the chip on, start over, wire up a set of dip switches. That's these guys. Wired up a set of dip switches so I can sort of bust through the config modes. Frustratingly, the console will frequently freeze when it gets angry about something that it sees on the other side of the bus. So I could either freeze the port, and then I could switch to the second port, but if I host the second port, then I basically needed to sit there and bounce the console. And bouncing the console at that point, again, booting the dump program off a CD on the N501, it was like, put it in, wait 5 minutes. Oh, no, it didn't read. Okay, start over again. Okay, no, I had to mark my disks knowing that they worked to just give me the assurance that it would for sure boot that disk if I just was patient with it. Sure enough, so 30 minutes getting that thing fired up again. Adam had the notion that we can probably accelerate accelerate the cycle by just adding a momentary to the reset line, so we can kind of toggle that to initiate a renegotiation of the bits. And that definitely works, and we're able to kind of move faster. We start cranking through the mode bits, getting some responses, and again, some that would just lock up the port. There's the under the chip traces showing some good stuff. The port would still lock up. I'm getting ahead of myself here, sorry. The system would boot. We figured out that we needed a properties value with an odd number in the thousands plates. And if we saw that, then we would know that the encoder was enabled to the system in a mode where it was accepting a spinner, not a mouse encoder. Because the mouse encoder, even though it toggled, it didn't make Tempest work. So we needed to continue working. The encoder is a distinct type of thing to the system. So anyway, we regroup, we recheck. Now we switch into upper 4 config mode, set the mode resistors, switch the mode, and start switching through combos. We get 800, we get 808, we get 1000, which has the, Adam was studying the SDK, and we need a properties value with an odd number in the thousands place, indicating to the BIOS that the encoder is present. So we know what we're looking for. We switch to upper 4 mode, and now our properties values are starting to return something that makes sense. We get 800, we get 808. We're actually able to kind of sort of systematically increment through something. Once I saw 1000, we knew we were onto something, and then I got 300F. So whatever, we were able to achieve an odd number in the thousands place. So I was like, okay, cool. That, I think, is what we're looking for. We got some bits going. Let's boot it up into Tempest 3000, and what do you know? The ship actually moves. So we got it, you know. The dump program's input, but it wasn't really working. The ship would kind of like move lazy. I was able to move one way, but not the other. And what turned out was there's an internal pull down on one of the inputs, and so I needed to kind of pull up an encoder. We had to adjust some of the circuitry on the encoder. So once we were able to get it kind of actually moving both ways, the ship was kind of too slow because I selected the too low of a pulse per rotation. That's another thing. Like I showed you the thing with the disc with the slots in it. The less slots, or the more slots, the finer the resolution, so it was kind of too low for that purpose. But I did have a 360 pulse per rotation optical encoder, which is what's actually in there right now, and that was something that could actually make the ship move in a responsive manner. At this point, everything works, so we rush to kind of put it in, but it's just sitting as bare boards, and I'm hitting it with tweezers to make things happen. The proof is complete. The controller works and is playable, so we build an enclosure in time for SoCal Retro Gaming Expo. That was, I pulled the stuff out so I could make or break it. We made it, so now we got a couple of days. Let's actually make it look presentable. So we go over to Sherman Oaks, get a box from All Electronics. Rest in peace, All Electronics. That's where I used to get my hookup wire. So sad. Anyway, we add arcade buttons and reconfigure the test stand into a fully playable control. You can kind of see it hiding underneath the bit there. And that kind of went pretty smoothly, thankfully. We did the SoCal Retro Gaming Expo show in August of 2016. You can see me hawking batteries there. But anyway, I also have most of this stuff over at my booth here if you want to come check it out. But at this point, I was done. I was exhausted after doing this. The project is complete. The documentation was made. Anyone who wanted a conspinner could heavily modify a rare and expensive gamepad at their own risk, and I wasn't going to do it for you. Project done. But I still wanted to make a spinner for Llamasoft. I had made contact with Jeff and Giles, who are Llamasoft, via the Llamasoft forums, Yak forums, and I put together a nice thing. I told them I wanted to send them something nice. They knew what I was up to, and I sent them this, and it was using because we hadn't done it, this was the route, right? So I took a controller, hacked it up nice, and threw it inside of a pretty box, and shipped it out in time for the Play Expo Manchester, which is when Polybius was announced. And I'm very proud of this. Right there in the background is our little spinner. Honestly, the spinner I selected was too high DPI, so it was a little touchy, but it was fully functional. It was fully functional. I could always fix that, but project for another day. I had the idea of doing a custom circuit board to make the modification easier, where you could just kind of pull the chip off the board and pull a chip off of a working controller onto my board so you could play Tempest with 1000. But I didn't figure anybody was going to pay for that because, again, you kind of have to sacrifice a controller. You know, sacrifices must be made. And it would only be worthwhile if chips were available to make a board. I even considered, or we bounced around the idea like, well, why don't we just re-implement it? But the commercial viability of that kind of thing, the potential for sales versus the kind of cost of development time didn't add up. So we punted and we just published the detail. I was done. I had project done. Until I got contacted by superfan Colby Shores in August 2017. This is another year later. He was starting on a similar quest of having a Nuon and wanting controller, except he had done some legwork and he had claimed to have located some polyface chips in a random overseas marketplace. That's something. So we had something to go on. So counterfeit remarked chips are totally a thing. Even before the chip shortage, you have something that, or you need something, and I think in this crowd we kind of understand that this exists. People do all kinds of weird stuff to get your cash. But we ordered a couple of samples at our own peril, and they work. So, you know how that goes. Guy's got some, he says, oh, cool, I'll send you a couple to make sure they're good. First one's free, right? And then, you give him all your money, and then he sends you garbage. Well, they worked, So much to our surprise, we tested them, and they worked. So we were able to kind of move forward since, I'm not going to be buying $100, $200, $300 controllers on eBay to start making a thing. Now that I got some ammunition to throw at kind of testing, I start working on a breadboard. We actually get it online for the first time in January of 2018. I actually initially had to actually use the mode resistors off of the donor board to kind of nurse it to health until we figured out what it was so unhappy about. But anyway, yeah, we were able to kind of get something going. But even the port on the console is proprietary. Okay, this is the Foxconn drawing of the Nuon spec controller port. I dug through my cables, just because I got them, because I had the cables that I had hacked off the controllers for the stuff that I had built. But if I'm going to do a thing, I can't just do that. So I came up with FireWire 4-pin cable. It just kind of looked about the same, so I pulled up the drawings and spot checking it. Everything seemed to kind of basically be within tolerance. So I took the risk and kind of gently maneuvered a FireWire 4-pin cable in a place it didn't belong. And I was able to electrically make sure that everything moved, and that's cool because then I can use off-the-shelf 4 to 6-pin FireWire cables as the sort of interface between the console without having to worry about this kind of proprietary interface. So I can kind of just hand wave past all that and just get a 6-pin FireWire cable from my side. Although if it was kind of popular enough and there was demand, you could just get as long as they're still available, get the FireWire 4-pin headers and make a new board for the console side that would allow clean mating of this. But then, of course, you wouldn't be able to cleanly mate your native thing. So it's kind of better in this configuration. So as long as the overmold is shaped correctly, you can use off-the-shelf cable. So that's pretty cool. So by June 2018, I had laid out a board and I had some made. There was a cap shortage at the time, but I was able to score the goods we needed and I flowed them out. It was my first time doing some surface mount assembly, and Adam's very particular about certain things, and he insisted that I hand do some I think it was specifically for the diode. He wanted me to make sure I double check and triple checked any layouts that I was using against the data sheet, and indeed one was wrong, and I didn't end up doing my own. So thank you, Adam. So we got some made, and they didn't come up. They just didn't come up. It took 2 weeks of staring at the thing and putting a logic analyzer on the bus and running a custom. As people do, you run a custom inverse assembler on it, only to find out that it's so obvious, when the peripheral to Nuon is returning 80 that it's not reading the ADC circuit correct. Duh. So anyway, we bodged it. And look, hey, that's factory. That's how it's supposed to be, right there. Cool, done. So it came up. I ran off a dozen, and I sold them, and by early 2019, and there was a thing. About this time, a potential business partner reached out and wanted us to build custom Nuon controllers. We did some work. It went absolutely nowhere. But Nick, back to Nick Persane, he used his, and I haven't seen too many other examples, but even though you can kind of imagine what's there. But there's my little board right there, and this is a spinner, and he's got a YouTube video of his kid playing Tempest 3000. So that's kind of cool. And that was it. I had used up my boards. There wasn't much interest or whatever, and that was it. I had a couple of little additions I wanted to make, but SoCal Retro Gaming Expo got announced, and I got an initiative to at least put everything out there and pull the stuff out and see what was going on with it. I dug out my Nuon stuff and jumped on the Discord channel. There wasn't a Discord when I kind of shelved the stuff, and I found out that as I had mentioned, the authentication keys actually showed up to sign DVDs. So that meant that I could actually run the controller dump program on the Toshiba, which makes working with things much easier from a troubleshooting standpoint. The N501 players, fun tidbit, they're required to boot homebrew for reasons, but they also have an undiagnosed systemic hardware bug that causes them to spontaneously wake up dead. So I've got a stack of them, and I don't like booting it up because I'm afraid it's either just not going to boot up or its hours are limited. And it is definitely not, so many people have kind of gone back and forth on this, it is definitely not a transport or a capacitor issue. I have recapped the entire board. I ESR tested all of the caps. They're all fine. I have multiple of these, and this is like a series Millennium chassis where there's like a deck and a jack PCB, and it like shares boards. So I'm in the process of troubleshooting that. I hope to be able to find a way to resurrect the N501. So that's maybe a story for a future Nuon State of the Universe. But anyway, pulling out all the gear for this talk, I found the parts all waiting for me. Emboldened, I float out a fresh run of boards. I booted the retail signed controller dump DVD, and lo and behold, they came up no problem. All testing fine, even the initial unit that did not come up 3 years ago that I thought was dead. So, what do you know? Could have been wiring, could have been whatever. At the time, I was fed up, but I am super stoked about this. So literally, just last week in February 2024, I shipped out a fresh herd of boards. There they are, coming up right on the dump program. I sent them out for testing. If the feedback is positive or at least not terrible, I'll do a run of boards until I exhaust my chips or come up with something else. And that's pretty much it, I'm not too far off time. So yeah, let's just go into questions. Anybody got questions? Cool. Anyway, go. Yeah,
what was your introduction to all of this, like to the Llamasoft stuff?
General being a fan of music visualizers, and then I think maybe kind of, I seem to recall it was, res and an interest in synesthesia and a back interest in the history of music visualizers that then led me to like, oh, Jeff Minter, VLM, this and that, Jaguar, Nuon, psychedelia and color space and all these things that kind of connected. So really, it was really more from the music visualizer standpoint that I started. That connected me to Jeff Minter. Saw that he made the Tempest 3000. Saw that there was sort of a injustice in the world that the game could not be natively controlled by its sort of like intended way. And so, I sought to resolve that injustice, and I would say we succeeded. Just as some sort of real quick, I'll take a couple more questions, but there were a couple of loose ends about the thing that I wanted to leave with y'all with. There were no, on any system, commercially released spinner controllers to play any of the Tempest home releases. Not Jaguar, not Nuon, not PlayStation, not Standard, none of them. Now, that being said, there was a native rotary controller for the Nintendo DS, but it worked with Arkanoid and Space Invaders, and there was never a Tempest for the Nintendo DS. So, Nuon controller hacking is nothing new. This controller, for the 2 games that support it, has a bug where basically the analog stick doesn't travel all the way. So the fixes are either to hack it up by modifying the neck of the analog stick, or hack up the shell to allow the thing to have full travel. So that's awesome. The death syndromes that the N501s go through, it can have a load belt failure. That's easy to fix. The optical pickup may fail, but you got to make sure you replace it with the right type. And then there's the loading failure, which is completely undiagnosed, but it is absolutely not a capacitor or a transport issue. Somebody's coming out with an optical drive emulator, apparently very expensive. You can burn DVDs. The transports are available in contemporary systems, so I'm not sure why that's super high in demand, but I guess that's a thing. Memory card support exists, but I'm kind of curious, like this, if it exists in Tempest 3000 so you can save your high scores, because right now you cannot do that. Related to high scores, hilariously, this is fully functional in Tempest 3000 except for the high score where it's like, it's impossible. It's just, I challenge you. That's hard mode Tempest 3000 is trying to enter your high score at the end, but I'm sure it could be patched to get fixed. Also, yes, there is an emulator. It's called Nuance. Rest in peace, Mike Perry, Riff. He had a brain aneurysm at 32 many years ago, and he was a genius, and he was the one who kind of went back, and even as the system was kind of exiting the market, got the spec documents and did a thing. Recently, some of that has gotten picked up and rehelmed, and apparently it's good enough because also computers are faster now. All of the titles are fully playable in the emulator, although I wouldn't know about it. Songbird Productions is selling an N64 controller converter called Aries 64, so if you're just desperate to kind of plug something in there, you can get that. And then there's confusingly named controller adapter that also makes an adapter that goes to USB for various systems, and apparently there's a Nuon version of that. I can make no vouch for either of those products. Obviously, I'm a little biased, but those are not native silicon, and if they blow up your system, it's not my fault. Yeah, okay, so back onto Q&A. Anything about Jeff Minter, Visual Light Machine on either the Jaguar CD, the Nuon, Xbox 360. Don't forget, if y'all got an Xbox 360, pull it out, put a Pink Floyd disc in there, bust out a couple of controllers and start wiggling those sticks, and you won't know what happened 10 hours later. All right, y'all. Little anecdote I'll add, just in case anybody comes up with something they want to ask. Also, I am LA, along with my brother, we are LA 3D Printer Repair, West Coast's only dedicated 3D printer repair place. Yes, it's the future. You can get your robot repaired locally. If y'all are thinking about buying a 3D printer, y'all have one or want to get something 3D printed, definitely look me up. I'd be more than happy to chat with y'all. Real quick anecdote, just quick kind of format wars anecdote. So, the Nintendo GameCube, Nintendo prided themselves almost on making it, like this thing had the small disc, so you knew your discs, you were not playing DVDs on there. Now, you can't say that none of them did, because there was that Panasonic Q1 that did play DVDs, so it's not like it was universal, but that was like a selling point for Nintendo in the time. Literally a selling point. They were trained at Game Crazy, like, oh, what about DVD movies? He's got the TV in his room. What's he gonna do? So, I swear to you, I could have sworn, like, you could play DVDs on the Wii. You cannot play DVDs on the Wii in the native software. Well, what I remembered, and what you may also remember if you're thinking about this, was this bizarre period where you actually got the Netflix internet streaming disc in the mail from Netflix in order to stream your movies. So, yeah, nowadays, obviously they don't do that. And it had to have a reminder, do not return this disc, because that was the normal thing. When you got the disc, you sent it back. So the pattern of Sony kind of coming in and kind of using their format to kind of stomp the market happened again with the Sony PlayStation. You were able to get a cheap Blu-ray player. Y'all remember this. You get a cheap Blu-ray player. Blu-ray, you want to play Blu-rays? Well, I get a free PlayStation with my Blu-ray player, and it's got a remote. It's just a Blu-ray player. I swear, like my aunt, she's like, oh yeah, put a Blu-ray in. I'm like, you have a PlayStation 3? Like, yeah, I got the cheap, And then, this was a pattern. DVD on the Xbox 360 had a little remote, right? And then this happened. Y'all remember this? This was hilarious what they tried to do here, because this was like just after it was released. It was like the next year. And they're like, oh yeah, sure. Except like as soon as Microsoft said, oh, we're not going to put games on this. Like you knew that they were not serious about this, and then that didn't happen. So anyway. That's what I got for y'all. I just thought that kind of side bit about Sony kind of going like, what do you mean put a DVD? What do you put in a game system in your DVD player? You put peanut butter in my chocolate. So cool, that's what I got, y'all. Another question, hit me.
So, I remember the Nuon. I remember it being the Punchline console. Like, it was the Punchline platform. It was like they're using software encoding for movies, and you can also run games on it.
Well, hey, no, as a DVD player, it's pretty sweet, I will say. So I don't know about that. As a DVD player, it's pretty sweet. It is kind of funny that most of the enhanced features you're going to get in the Dr. Dolittle and the Bedazzled and stuff, it's literally just the extra fast forward and zoom features that are like, that's the reason why you got the ad as a DVD player. Unless, you know, anybody who knows, the only people who know about the Nuon had approached me, and actually it's funny, like a developer of the Nuon approached me at this show and said, oh yeah, cool, here's this 3D print of Gorf 3D, an asset for a game that was never announced and never released, and, or well, I guess Kevin Main knows about it, yeah, it's just hilarious, like, oh yeah, by the way, I developed for the system and that game went nowhere. Yeah, the Jaguar people were the ones who kind of knew that this was happening because I guess they wanted more, you know, they wanted more Tempest, so, you know, good for them. But hey, thanks, y'all. Thanks for coming, and you know, hope to see you next year. And a little plug for, again, my 3D printer repair stock. But then if you're local out here in Southern California, the TRW swap meet is every last Saturday of the month, and it's a ham radio swap meet. If you're not a ham, you know, 73s, KI6YDP, you know, definitely consider getting that. It's a great thing to have. But then also it's a great place to meet like-minded folks who are into electronics and games and kind of stuff. And TRW swap meet has all this kind of stuff locally for good prices. So cool, thanks y'all. Oh, hit me. Last Saturday of the month, if you search for SoCal Electronic Swap Meet, it should come up, but it's W6TRW, which is the call sign of the Redondo Beach Radio Club, or maybe I'm getting their name wrong, but anyway, they run a swap meet, and I would encourage y'all to check it out. I'm a vendor out there, and if you see me, please say hi. So cool, thanks y'all. Oh, and I do have a booth, so if y'all want to come check it out, come see me at E34, I think I am. So cool, thanks again, y'all.